The Charter of the United Nations was signed on June 26, 1945, in San Francisco and entered into force on October 24, 1945. It is divided into 19 chapters, including the purposes and principles, the General Assembly, and the Security Council. I will now briefly explain the general contents of the Charter of the United Nations. Let's start with the preamble. There are many elements mentioned in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations, where I would like to highlight some of them. First, the United Nations Charter aims to protect future generations. Let's remember that this document dates back to 1945 from the consequences of the two previous world wars. Second, the UN Charter also aims to reaffirm the human rights, specifically in terms of human dignity. Third, it is important to note that this preamble highlights the theme of equality in two senses. First, equality between women and men. Second, equality between large and small nations. Fourth, this document agrees to create the condition with this document to maintain international justice. Fifth, this document also provides that nations large and small respect international treaties and international law. And finally, to promote social progress in order to have greater freedom. Once this is understood, we can move on to the purposes of the Charter of the United Nations. Among nations, and specifically, I would like to highlight that the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations states that nations should practice tolerance and live together in peace on the issue of good neighborliness. In addition, another of the purposes of this charter is to maintain international peace and security through certain principles such as the common interest. And a very important purpose of this legal document is to establish an international mechanism to protect the economy and social progress of the nations. Now, let's move on to Chapter 1, entitled Purposes and Principles. Article 1 establishes the purposes of the United Nations, which are divided into four specifically, and these are to maintain international peace and security, to promote friendly relations among other nations, based on the principles of equal rights and self-determination of people, and to strengthen universal peace, international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, and cultural or humanitarian nature. Respect for human rights is also a subject of international cooperation, which for the first time stipulates the term human rights in this universal document. Finally, the United Nations should serve as a center of harmonizing the effects of nations to achieve these common purposes. These that we just have pointed out are common purposes of the nations, at least in this legal document, and Article 2 points out 7 common principles among which stand out sovereign equality, fulfill in good faith the obligations contracted, settle international disputes by peaceful means, refrain from resorting to the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, and not intervene in matters of international jurisdictions of the states. Chapter 2 deals with the subject of the members of this organization of the United Nations. It is pointed out who are the members, how they become members, and how is the administration of the new states as members. Likewise, it also points out the causes of expulsion from the United Nations organization by the General Assembly and the recommendation of the General Council. Chapter 3 describes the organs of the United Nations organization, and Article 7 establishes the 6 principal organs, which are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat of the United Nations organization, among others. Article 7 also states that subsidiary organs might establish according to the needs of the United Nations organization. It is important to emphasize that Article 8 states that shall be no restrictions on the eligibility of men and women to participate on an equal footing and in any capacity in the functions of its principal and subsidiary organs. Chapter 4 establishes the General Assembly from its composition, its functions and powers, its voting, and the voting procedure. Let us briefly review the contents of this section. First, the General Assembly shall be composed of all members of the United Nations, so that no member might have more than 5 representatives in the General Assembly. Among its functions and powers are, first, to discuss any matter relating to the Charter of the United Nations, or to discuss the powers and functions of the organs created by the Charter, and to make recommendations on such matters to the members of the United Nations or to the Security Council or both. Second, the United Nations may make recommendations with respect to the principles of cooperation in the maintenance of international peace and security and the principles governing disarmament and the regulation of armaments. Third, it might also discuss matters relating to the maintenance of international peace and security submitted for its consideration by any member of the United Nations or of the Security Council. Fourth, it may also bring to the attention of the Security Council situations which may endanger international peace and security. Article 2 is very clear in stating that if the Security Council is performing the functions of this character with respect to a dispute or situation, the General Assembly shall not make any recommendation on such dispute unless requested to do so by the Security Council. Here, for example, the Secretary General has two important functions in matters of international security. First function is that, with the consent of the Security Council, he shall report to the General Assembly at each session on all matters relating to the maintenance of international peace and security being dealt with the Security Council. Second function is that it shall report to the General Assembly as soon as the Security Council has finished dealing with such matters. Another of the functions of the United Nations Charter establishes for the General Assembly is to promote studies and make recommendations, among other things, to help make human rights effective. The General Assembly shall also receive and consider the annual and special reports of the Security Council. These reports normally cover measures taken or decided upon for the maintenance of international peace and security. In addition, the General Assembly shall receive and consider the reports of the other organs of the United Nations. The General Assembly also considers and approves the budget of the organization. The member of the General Assembly shall also pay the expenses of the organization in the proportion determined by the General Assembly. In terms of voting, it is important to note that each member of the General Assembly shall have now one vote, and decision of the General Assembly on important matters shall be made by 2/3 majority vote of the members present and voting. Among these situations are recommendations relating to the maintenance of international peace and security, the election of non-permanent members of the Security Council, and the election of the members of the Economic and Social Council. The admission of new members to the United Nations, the suspension of the rights and privileges of the members, and the expulsion of members, among others. If other matters are decided upon, then the solution shall be that the vote shall be by 2/3 majority and shall be taken by a majority of the members presented and voting. The meetings of the Assembly may be held in two ways, either annually in ordinary sessions or wherever situations require an extraordinary sessions. Now, let me talk about the fifth chapter, which establishes the Security Council, and this chapter states its composition, its functions and powers, its voting and voting procedure mainly. The Security Council, it is composed of 15 members of the United Nations. Of these 15 members, only 5 will be permanent members of the Security Council: the United States, China, France, Russia, and Great Britain. The other 10 members shall be non-permanent members of the Security Council, who shall be elected on the basis of their contribution to the maintenance of international peace and security, the purposes of the organization, and equitable geographic distribution. Each member of the Security Council shall have one representative. Among its functions and powers are primarily the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, to submit annual reports and special reports to the General Assembly, to elaborate plans for the establishment of a system of the regulation of armaments to which the members of the United Nations shall submit. As for voting, each member of the Security Council shall have one vote. On procedural matters, decisions shall be taken by the affirmative vote of 9 members. The decisions of the Security Council on all other members shall be taken by the affirmative vote of 9 members, including the affirmative votes of all permanent members. As for the good voting procedure, the Security Council will have at all times its representative at the headquarters of the organization. Regular meetings will be held. It is important to note that any member of the United Nations that is not a member of the Security Council might participate without the right of vote in the discussion of a matter brought before the Security Council when it considers that it harms its interests. Member states of the United Nations might be invited without the right of vote in discussions relating to disputes to which they are a party. Now, Chapter 6 deals with the peaceful settlement of disputes, and through its 6 articles establishes the tools for settling disputes through, for example, negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, regional agreements, or other peaceful means of their choice. The Security Council might urge the parties to settle their disputes by these means. Now, Chapter 7 provides for action in case of threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, or acts of aggression. Through its 13 articles, this chapter contains the procedure of the Security Council either to determine the existence of a threat or a breach of an act aggression, to make any recommendations and decide on the measures it will take to maintain or establish international peace and security. Entitled Regional Arrangements, and states that the Charter of the United Nations does not oppose to the existence of such arrangements, whose purpose is to understand matters relating to the maintenance of international peace and security, and which are susceptible to regional action. It is even established that through these agreements the peaceful settlement of local disputes can be achieved. The ninth chapter establishes international economic and social cooperation, and through its 6 articles, this chapter contemplates the purpose of the United Nations organization to promote peaceful and friendly relations among nations by promoting higher standards of living, condition of economic and social progress and development, solution of international economic and social problems, international cultural and educational cooperation, as well as the promoting universal respect for human rights. On the other hand, the 10th chapter establishes the Economic and Social Council, its composition, its function and powers, its voting form and voting procedure. In brief, we will analyze the Economic and Social Council. The Economic and Social Council is composed by 54 members of the United Nations who are elected by the General Assembly. Each member of this Economic and Social Council will have one representative. Among its functions and powers are to initiate studies and reports with respect to international economic, social, cultural, educational, and health matters, and to make recommendations on such matters to the General Assembly members of the United Nations and specialized agencies. Another function is to make recommendations for the promotion of respect of human rights. It also may formulate draft conventions on matters within its competence and submit them to the General Assembly. Chapter 11 is entitled Declaration Concerning Non-Self-Governing Territories. Chapter 12 is entitled International Arrangements and Trusteeship. Chapter 13 is entitled The Trusteeship Council. Chapter 14 establishes the International Court of Justice. This section includes 5 articles, which state that the International Court of Justice shall be a judicial organ, being the principal organ of the organization. Its functions shall be established in a statute. The court might give a legal advisory opinion if so requested by the General Assembly or the Security Council. Chapter 15 contains the Secretariat, which shall consist of a Secretary General and such staff as is required by the organization. The Secretary General is appointed by the General Assembly upon recommendation of the Security Council. The Secretary General is a chief administrative officer of the organization. Let us recall that this year the United Nations is celebrating its 80th anniversary and it's the world's largest multilateral platform.